This is David with the Dirt Podcast. We're going to do a late night deep dive into the man, myth, legend, Dr. Seuss. So first of all, I'm not going to tell you how to feel about Dr. Seuss. I'm just going to lay out, his history and who he was as a person, not just as Dr. Seuss, but as Theodore Giesel, his original name. We'll get to know his history a little bit, and you can make up your own mind as to how you feel about it all. These are the 6 discontinued books, and there's a lot of questions around why, what is the content, why is it racist or not, and was Dr. Seuss racist or was he not? We're going to go into all of that, and I just don't want to give superficial answers. I want to actually go into his artwork, his history, and, again, it's for you to decide how you feel about it. While we go over the basics of Dr. Seuss's life, I'm going to show some excerpts from The Secret Art of Dr. Seuss, which I highly recommend. It's a lot of his fine art, his paintings, and his sculptures. So Dr. Seuss was born in 1904, and he died in 1991. Seen a lot in that century. His parents were German immigrants, but he lived the majority of his life in California, though he was born in Minnesota. He lived in LA, and he died in San Diego. He went to Oxford College in England, and he got out before he graduated. He didn't necessarily go for illustration, but his first wife talked him into becoming an illustrator, and at 24, he did his first illustration jobs, and continued doing ads and illustrations for magazines, political cartoons, and advertisements. He didn't do his first kids book until he was about 46, and he did 55 books total from that point forward. The style you see in his kids book is pretty much the style he had his whole life. He never really ventured into realism or anything other than what you see. All the same characters that he had in his kids books he drew throughout his career in advertisements as well, and political cartoons. So Dr. Seuss never had any kids. He famously said, "You have 'em, I'll entertain 'em." Before we get into Dr. Seuss's political side, let's look at some of his advertisements. I mean, he kind of had that same style, just like burned into everything that he did from the beginning. He had those imaginary creatures, whimsical people, just very fun and probably perfect for a lot of ads to get people's interest, and, looks pretty dynamic and interesting and fun and different from the other ads you might see in a magazine. I'm not even sure who his influences were. But yeah, he just never varied from that style. I like this one a lot. I'm not really sure why, but it looks fun. He advertised for sugar and this flit gun that you shoot mosquitoes with. He did beer labels and beer advertisements. Here's an ad obviously for a beauty supply company. It's a beautifying machine. The girls go in and then they come out after they go through the whole process of using all the products. I don't think this would fly today, and I wonder if that company is still around. And here's another book cover he did, The Pocket Book of Boners. In the early days, that didn't mean what it means today. That didn't translate well over time. That word just meant doing stupid things. That word is actually in my elementary school book because they didn't update it. And now we get to the more offensive stuff. So this is not my favorite stuff to show, but we're trying to be complete here and give a complete picture. In his earlier days, Dr. Seuss was a little bit guilty of using negative, what nowadays would be considered negative racial tropes. Back then they were just considered normal and humorous and good-natured, but it doesn't translate well over time, doesn't age well. So here's another one. These are savages in the jungle again, and they're boiling an explorer because they're cannibals, and he pops out to shoot the mosquito. So now we'll get into some of Dr. Seuss's political cartoons. I'm not really sure the order in which these happened, so I don't know what the progression is. He definitely was a Democrat. I believe he supported FDR. He definitely had environmental issues on his mind, which came through in his books. And it is reported that he was a liberal. So some people point to these and say Dr. Seuss definitely was not a racist because, this is Uncle Sam clearing racism out of the minds of Americans. This was around the time of World War II. There was a lot of fear, and America was dealing with the aftermath of that. He has some other cartoons that are not as kosher as this one. So this is one of Dr. Seuss's most famous political cartoons. It's getting shared a lot. He definitely was a globalist more than a nationalist, and he was showing the duality of America. There was America First, which was tied, what he felt was tied to, Nazism and nationalism. He had a German background, so maybe, that influenced some of how he viewed things. This is called The Great U.S. Sideshow, and definitely anti-racist. He definitely sided in with empathy for the Jews and pro-America in taking part in the war. Here's another one that shows his good side, where he has sympathy for basically the children and immigrants. Again, the American First Lady, and she's saying the wolf chewed up the children, spit out their bones, but those were foreign children, so it really didn't matter. Obviously, it's being sarcastic and showing the heartlessness of a negative type of nationalism. Here's another anti-racist cartoon where it's against anti-Semitism. There were actual Nazis in the U.S., or Nazi sympathizers or white supremacists, and it's the white supremacist or U.S. Nazi taking Uncle Sam by the hand to get his hand cut off, by anti-Semitism. So strangely enough, around the 1930s, before World War II, there were actually Nazi recruitment camps and white supremacist camps in America. This is in New Jersey, and there was ones in New Jersey, New York, and in California, surprisingly enough. I didn't learn about this till recently, but there's a lot of photo evidence. This is a kids' camp. Really strange that this was in America, but I think the war turned most people around to, not be into this stuff. But just as Dr. Seuss feared Nazism and Hitler, he also feared the Japanese in America. So being Californian, he obviously feared the Japanese in California. That they are also showing Oregon and Washington. I guess there must have been communities there. And, you can see them handing out TNT to the Japanese and just swarms of Japanese. And I'm not sure if he generalized Asians or if it was only towards the Japanese. Here's another one. Jap was just a word that they used back then, but now specifically it's a bad word to use because it was used in negative connotations through political cartoons such as this and many others. Here he shows the Japanese as alley cats and Uncle Sam like a bird taking care of one at a time, but there's too many of him and of them to take care of. Here he is mocking the Japanese as a war threat. There were a lot of negative feelings, and the Japanese did do a lot of damage with the kamikaze planes and Pearl Harbor. You have to understand that they had created a lot of fear as a country, siding in with the communist countries. And since then, though, they're a lot different country than they were back then. And here he is again with his nationalist comic, where he ties in America's First with Nazis, with fascists and communists. Like one leads to another, generationally, is what he was warning of. Definitely wouldn't have been for Make America Great Again. So back to these books. How does that tie into these and how these are perceived? Well, I have 3 of them, and I don't have the other 3. One I was aware of that I didn't want, and the other 2 I didn't even know they existed, so I doubt a lot of people even know. These are not the main lineup of books, so a lot of people will never even feel the effect of these books going away. And if you really want them, you can get them on eBay, I'm sure, for a slightly inflated price. I did love If I Ran the Zoo. That was just a kid saying what he would, all the animals, imaginary animals he would bring in if he ran the zoo, and from all these exotic places. And Mr. Ellington's pool had some, that one was my favorite illustration wise, because he gets a little artsier in there, with colors and shading and just beautiful illustrations. I will miss that one being on the shelves. The Things I Saw on Mulberry Street was just another, whimsical story. I didn't even know about Scrambled Eggs, the Scrambled Eggs book. Never heard of On Beyond Zebra, and I just didn't want the Cat's Quizzer. those three I wouldn't necessarily miss, and I have the other ones. You know, if you're really a Dr. Seuss fan, you would already had some of these. This is where it ties in. These are some of the illustrations that they're not showing, you know, that were part of the books. This is one of the illustrations from If I Ran the Zoo, and it's showing Chinamen bringing in, you know, exotic animals. And in the words it says, with helpers who wear their eyes in a slant. In some ways it may seem harmless, and, you know, maybe someone is offended and maybe they're not. But where this gets a little dicey is that even if there wasn't bad intent from Dr. Seuss, he's using tropes that were used in entertainment, from like vaudeville to illustrations, and even movies that were used with negative connotations and negative stereotypes, you know, to be demeaning to people. Like some of this stuff historically dates back to sort of like blackface. But I think that Dr. Seuss was just trying to be fun and inclusive. Until Bruce Lee, a lot of Asians in movies only got to be the laundry person or the comedic relief. And sometimes they were even played by white people, dressed up. But with some of this stuff, I wish they just used a disclaimer like Disney uses on some of their movies. Like the Muppets were not canceled, and many Disney shows were not canceled. They just put a disclaimer in front of them now saying that this program may include negative depictions or mistreatment of people or cultures. And, you know, the stereotypes are wrong then and wrong now. Rather than remove the content, we acknowledge the harmful impact and learn from it and spark conversation to create a more inclusive future together. So I think that's the right way to do it, and, you know, maybe there's a way to do that eventually with the Dr. Seuss books. Doesn't mean they'll never print them again. They may, you know, come out in limited runs in the future if there's a demand for it, or, you know, who knows. But we still have 50 amazing books from Dr. Seuss that you can still get a hold of. They teach us to be loyal, to take care of the environment, to be whimsical, to have fun, to be inclusive, to eat green eggs and ham. They can always republish the other ones one day, you know, special editions or limited editions. Maybe there'll be a disclaimer in it if we clamor for them enough. And I just think the estate is trying to get ahead of the curve for if people come after the books one day. They're just trying to do it themselves. And they've actually sold more books. They've had a large increase in sales since they took out those 6 books. So I hope you enjoyed this deep dive and have a greater appreciation for Dr. Seuss and what the estate has done, a greater understanding, and make of it what you will.